Yep. Hi everybody, this is your friend Daniel Hutchins. We're back again for another episode here on the Hutchins Hut. Yeah, we're here on the Hutchins Hut. I want to wish y'all guys a happy Easter. I want to wish y'all a happy Easter. Here at the Hutchins Hut, we take great pride in our watchers and viewers. Okay, so what did we just do? Well, we were listening to a little bit of some my favorite children's songs, and my sister was sleeping. So I figured I'd try to crank out a little more of these live shows. Okay. Or should we say we crank out a live show for you, my friends, for you. Well, also, just finished up another show. Yes, I just finished up another show on Disney Plus. So what are we going to be doing? Well, I'm glad you guys asked because we are going to be continuing the comic book universe. Yes, we're going to continue the comic book universe. So, what are we going to talk about? Well, that's a good question. Because today, in Comic Book Universe, we're going to talk about a bunch of different things. Okay. Okay. Now, today, we're going to be talking about some Star Wars. Yes, some Star Wars. Did you guys know that Ahsoka Tano has revealed the trickiest part about holding two lightsabers? Yes, Ahsoka Tano may be really good at maneuvering two lightsabers, but it's like second nature. Star Wars Ahsoka Tano, who we know as Rosario Dawson, said, while it is awesome, it is trickier than it looks. This is from what she said from Star Wars Celebration in 2025 in Tokyo. Now, Comic Book Resources offer has just said what it was like with wielding two lightsabers. While actually doing two together is quite awesome, she's kind of used to it. It's certain moves where I have to go over the Montreals. That's where it's kind of like it gets really tricky because once you start practicing, you get your feet down and then you're keeping it close to your body. She's saying Montreals are kind of like cone-like horns on the head of the Tortuga species and act as an extra sensory organ that helps you anticipate movement around you. The big Ahsoka news has now been confirmed. When Ahsoka Tano now returns to Disney Plus for a highly anticipated second season, fans can suspect an appearance by a big name in the Star Wars franchise. It was announced during the Star Wars celebration in 2025 in Tokyo this week that Hayden Christensen will return for season 2 as Anakin. Now, again, he's played the role in the trilogy since the 90s. That's not surprised at all because we already know that. There's not much we can say, but Anakin Skywalker will be back for season 2. He's confirmed. And the panel, he appeared on a stage with Dawson, showrunner, and Dave Filoni, and executive producer Jon Favreau during a panel where they confirmed the other night that season 2 of Ahsoka is going to be filming early as next week. Star Wars Ahsoka Tano, Disney Plus. The Rotten Tomatoes score by critic is 85%, while the audience score is only a low 64%, with an overall rating of 7.5 out of 10, which is not that bad actually. What to expect when Ahsoka Tano returns? Well, as Filoni has also revealed at Star Wars Celebration this week, Season 2 will consist of 8 episodes, the same as the first season. Now, it first premiered on Disney Plus on 2023, in addition to Dawson as the Jedi Ahsoka Tano and former Padawan Master Anakin Skywalker. And again, like we said, also stars Sabine Wren and others on the cast as well. Well, also appeared in 5 episodes in the first season of the series. It is revealed that Star Wars Celebration is supposed to bring back the character of Baylan Skoll, who is to return and be played by another actor because we know there's going to be somebody replacing the original actor. It's going to be replaced by a guy who's famous for the Game of Thrones. Well, also, it's also rumored that Natalie Portman could also make a cameo appearance in season 2, reprising her role as Padme Amidala from her prequel films, although that's just rumor. But podcast host also said in January of this year that Natalie Portman was close to closing a deal with the studio. I'd probably be in a world between worlds type of thing where I'd be like, okay, makes sense if Ewan McGregor was there, so again, young Ahsoka there as well. Well, I'm hearing it's like she's open to it. I don't know if it's a signed deal yet or if it's rumor, but I think it's pretty close, she said. Ahsoka season 1 is now streaming on Disney Plus. Season 2 is supposed to be later this year or in 2026. This is from our resource on Comic Book Resources, Star Wars Celebration 2025. And a reminder, Ahsoka Tano came out in 2023, so it'd be about 2 years after. So, just so you guys are aware of that. Okay, so that's what's going on with Ahsoka Tano. What else is going on in Comic Book Universe? Well, I'm glad you guys asked because we did do some other stuff. Okay, so did you guys know there is some jokes about Jar Jar Binks? Jar Jar Binks jokingly confirms that Darth Jar Jar is canon in Star Wars Celebration 2025. Now, during this celebration of Star Wars Celebration, day number 3, we already know Jar Jar Binks has reminisced about his performance during the respective Star Wars films we know, the prequels, from 1999 to 2005. While fans expected the veteran actors would share fun and nostalgic stories while working on the sets of Galaxy Far, Far Away, a lot of people have pleasant surprises. One of the best acknowledged ones was the biggest joke that's finally made canon, specifically more about Jar Jar Binks. Best jokingly known claimed Jar Jar Binks that Darth Jar Jar is canon. Yes, now Jar Jar Binks or Darth Jar Jar is now canon thanks to Star Wars lore. Darth Jar Jar is actually one of the longest running jokes of the Star Wars fandom. He's existed as far back as the prequels trilogy's open days. He's even said that there's been some more history to Darth Jar Jar than even his most ardent believers and disciples may realize. Ahmad Best jokingly confirms that Jar Jar Binks was the Star Wars prequel trilogy's real villain. Yes, the real villain. During the panel, the actors talked about how difficult and emotional gratifying to portray robots and wholly digital CGI characters, while also C3PO also had relevance to both the Star Wars and real life as well, jokingly saying that the lasting legacy was nothing compared to what Jar Jar Binks and his political and historic infamy. Yes, Anthony Daniels and Ahmad Best were both there at Star Wars Celebration of 2025. They were referencing the events of Episode 3, 2005, Revenge of the Sith, which this year is celebrating its 20th anniversary. Again, Jar Jar Binks is also one of the most convinced entire Galactic Senate to let Sheev Palpatine reform the Republic in Galactic Empire. It is thanks to him and former comic relief character had terrorized and had tyranny spread across the galaxy in more ways than one. So Jar Jar Binks is the reason why two major wars for freedom broke into two separate generations. The the Republic and the Empire. Remember, the Public and the Empire. Although he never referenced the memes by name, he's best joked confirming Jar Jar Binks' political banter as actually part of the canon, and is now canon. So, more sinister conspiracy basically canonized the jokes of Darth Jar Jar. In brief, the joke is based on Star Wars fans' belief that Jar Jar Binks was overall the villain of Star Wars prequel. His oafish persona is just a mask of the real villainous mastermind he hid behind. Believe it or not, this was actually because not the first time, but he's acknowledged that Darth Jar Jar is basically made canon. Now, previously he reprised his role of Jar Jar Binks for stop motion parody sketches like Robot Chicken, and desperate Emperor Palpatine called Jar Jar Binks on the phone, begging for his political support for reinforcements. Now, again, Jar Jar Binks has laughed off the Emperor and threw the Sith robe on himself and cackled maniacally just until the sketch ended. Darth Jar Jar is one of Star Wars fandom's most beloved inside jokes. The meme started as an ironic joke before it became fan favorite punchline. It is difficult to pinpoint when and why Darth Jar Jar became a recurrent joke among Star Wars fans, but what is clear is that Darth Jar Jar started as a joke made to mock his character in the prequel films by writer-director George Lucas, then perceived some lack of Brighton talent. The joke has combined most of his maligned comic relief characters in film history with George Lucas' use of unsatisfying plot twists to no one. This was also probably partially because Lucas' now most infamous quote, where he claimed Jar Jar Binks was the most pivotal character in Star Wars prequels, for still some very unclear reasons. Jar Jar Binks is basically the key to all of it. If we got Jar Jar working, because he's the funny character we've all had in our movies. Related to this article, George Lucas' rumor cameo Star Wars Phantom Menace finally revealed 26 years later. But we're not talking about that. We're talking more about Jar Jar Binks here. Now, due to the backlash that Jar Jar Binks had sparked online with online harassment, he's basically unjustly subjected to George Lucas noticeably reduced the character's on-screen presence with each passing sequel. And by the time the third episode came out, Revenge of the Sith, Jar Jar Binks had become a glorified cameo, where he had voted to give the Emperor Palpatine all of his political and military power that he wanted because of one grave sin. Fans jokingly theorized that George Lucas originally planned to have Jar Jar Binks again with Darth Plagueis as another high-ranking Sith Lord. However, according to fan theories, later, Lucas has only retconned that idea by begrudgingly retooling the character to respond to the audience's visual. But in an initial outrage against the Star Wars prequel trilogy, gradually turned into positive appreciation, genuine love, and also memes, Darth Jar Jar and Jar Jar Binks himself are changed from insults to fun jokes. Where there is no bigger proof than said than done, the crowd cheers when they see Jar Jar's voice during the Sidekicks panel. Now, Darth Jar Jar is now one of the most well-known love run gags that is now considered Star Wars canon. Seeing Ahmad Best himself not only acknowledge this joke, but also canonize it, and during one of the biggest days of Star Wars fandom, is both hilarious and warming. Ahmad Best in his future in Star Wars is bright and full of possibility, where one much would rather actually be Darth Jar Jar. Okay, so that's what's going on with Jar Jar Binks, in case you guys want to know what's going on with Jar Jar Binks. Okay, so we talked about Ahsoka, we talked about Jar Jar Binks. What else is there to talk about? Well, that's a good question, because we're catching up on some Star Wars and some other stuff. Okay, okay. Now, we're talking about some video games now. Why is GameCube coming back on Nintendo Switch Online? Why is GameCube coming back to Nintendo Switch Online? And why is it such a big deal? Now we know Nintendo Switch 2 is now supposed to be announced, and Nintendo has announced GameCube games will be coming to Nintendo Switch Online. Originally launched in 2001, we know in North America and Japan we have the infamous GameCube, which is essentially Nintendo's latest cutting-edge console, being more powerful than the PS2 or Xbox, which main competitors in the time. Now, even so, it's easily said the legend says that at least out of the generation reaching at least 22 million sales for over its lifetime. Sales aren't the only metric to Nintendo, however, the GameCube had some of Nintendo's best and strangest titles alongside the great third-party games. While it's disappointing that Nintendo Switch Online is skipping over the Virtual Boy, at least for now, nostalgia is currently reaching a fever pitch for sixth-generation consoles, alongside with increased storage capacity on Switch 2, which makes it perfect time to invest with GameCube, and GameCube is making a comeback. Nintendo is arguably the most creative on GameCube. Most entries on GameCube remain to have some of the books and some of the games that have been left out. Nintendo's premier launch for GameCube wasn't a typical Mario platform, it was called Metroid. Metroid is a game And also we had Zelda. But also, don't forget, we also had Luigi's Mansion. Luigi's Mansion is the first horror-themed action film title. It also not only has been intentional, but has been standalone, the GameCube's first party library, and has consisted of unique oddball games that have broke new grounds. But it doesn't satisfy the broad audience. For example, when the flagship Mario platform finally did come out, Super Mario Sunshine, Mario's typical jumping prowess is supplemented by talking water jetpack and systems Mario Kart Double Dash, which would be the first ever Mario Kart to put two characters on a kart simultaneously. And also, there's also the solo Kirby title, which is called Kirby's Air Ride. And GameCube was also the debut of the new Nintendo IP Pikmin, which also found success 22 years later with the Switch on Pikmin 4. The latest article, Nintendo Switch 2's GameCube app needs one game to make me buy the system. We're not talking about that. If Pikmin 4 is any indication that players are finally ready for the weird to come back, GameCube, yes, GameCube, fan opinions say the Wind Waker's art style mixed upon release has since grown increasingly more positive. For example, GameCube has found its audience over the shelf life. Of course, there are some exceptions to the rules, such as well as some good reputation games, such as Super Smash Bros. Melee and Super Mario Sunshine. Still, there are tons of GameCube titles that deserve another chance or a remaster, if that did anything. Because there's a lot of things going on, and they want to remaster a lot of the GameCube games. And now is the time to do that. RPG classics like Skies of Arcadia Legends and Fire Emblem, Path of Radiance, and platforms like Donkey Kong Jungle Beat and Billy Hatcher and Giant Egg, or just some to name a few. While also there were other games like Cubivore, Doshin the Giant, and Odama, and there's only one type of GameCube game that they need that they took advantage for the Game Boy Advance connectivity. Again, one of the first attempts at a dual screen gameplay. The feature that's difficult to replicate but is not impossible. Again, surprising numbers of titles utilize the GameCube's ability to cross again with the Game Boy Advance system. Little under 70 total. While also some games would let players download mini games on Game Boy Advance, and also such as Animal Crossing and other famous games like Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker will also be on Nintendo Switch Online during the launch. It's unconfirmed if players will be able to utilize the Game Boy Advance features, but we would like to see them. If they can, though, it opens up a ton of possibilities and opportunities for players to experience the prohibitively expensive than original hardware. These features aren't always worth it, but however, it's accessible to great preservation and nostalgia. It would also open up the doors for two big games that utilize the Game Boy Advance connectivity, the multiplayer of Legend of Zelda Four Swords Adventures and Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. Both games are still playable as solo player, but not nearly as fun as you're alone. While there are some that say the full group of four players. Nintendo's game chat service will also be great for these games, allowing players to easily coordinate online with Nintendo Switch Online Chat, where you sit on the couch together and play the game. With new voice acting and online plays available, fans might have to consider this a little bit of a downgrade, as four players can't stick together in one whole entire adventure. The Nintendo Switch Online release doesn't include a remaster, but we still are getting some anyway. Whereas fans have been anticipating another remaster coming to Switch, basically called The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker HD and Twilight Princess HD, all which have been announced in the original version on Switch 2 at launch. Many players have assumed these HD high definition remasters have no chance of coming to the platform. However, Nintendo has reinstated the Wind Waker HD high definition may still come to Switch 2 in some point or another, but this has not been precedented. The remake of the original Pokemon Mystery Dungeon titles released on Switch in 2020, with the Game Boy Advance version originally eventually coming to 2024, this reverse again has fans hope to happen for the Switch too. while other remakes still don't have the original counterparts on the Nintendo Switch Online store. Well, such as Mario RPG, Super Mario RPG to be more exact, it is not impossible for both versions to coexist. Nintendo can also market on Nintendo Switch Online releases as something like demos and other gameplay modes, letting players try the original game, then get the high definition version for their enhanced visuals and visual effects. While also, of course, there's always the worst outcome, games can be removed from the Nintendo Switch Online before the remakes are made, which is unfortunate reality of the digital age we live from. And the players don't really own anything on subscription services through digital purchases, as seen from recent removal of Super Soccer, due to license agreements. Now, they've been delisted that for many reasons though, but we're not talking more specifically that reason. Nintendo has done similar things in the past, such as removing Donkey Kong games from previous storefronts by anticipation of re-releasing on new consoles. Well, the announcement during Nintendo Treehouse, which is a podcast with F-Zero, GX, and Nintendo Switch Online, includes the arcade exclusive AX content. It seems like the sky is the limit for GameCube on Nintendo Switch Online. Although games are high resolution, some will have widescreen support built in, while they may take up considerable amount of size on the system. As display capacity on a real GameCube system is only 2 gigabytes, or 2 GBs, that means Nintendo will probably find some way to compress them so they don't take us so much space. Again, it won't take as much space. Okay, we're going to be now talking about the best Nintendo 64 games that are not on the Switch yet. Now, since we're on the subject of Nintendo, the best N64 games that aren't on the Switch yet. Okay, Nintendo Switch Online offers huge selections of retro and nostalgic games from our childhood, most notably under the system we call the expansion packs here on Nintendo Switch Online. Among the systems where games are available to play under these expansion packs was the Nintendo 64. Now, Nintendo 64, again, just like the GameCube we've talked about, has incidentally been released more than over 20 years ago. Again, today most Nintendo 64 games are hard to play, while fantastic titles have been yet but all but forgotten. But makes it really important to bring Nintendo 64 classics back, like Diddy Kong Racing and Doom 64. Now, again, the Switch 2 is on the way. It's the perfect time to expand the library and help out the Nintendo 64 games find their new audience. Coming up on number 10 on the list, we got Battle Tanks. Battle Tanks is the right way to bring tank action. This is a game that launched on the holidays of 1998. Again, the publisher is made by 3DO. Battle Tanks is a cult classic Nintendo 64 action game created by 3DO. Again, perhaps better known for the oft forgotten game console of that same name, set in 2001, just a few years after Battle Tanks' 1998 release. It reimagines the world where a virus has wrecked the societal norms, while also leading everybody to pit themselves against each other in tanks. Okay, but hopefully we'll see that come to fruition on Nintendo Switch Online. Next, we have Space Station Silicon Valley. Space Station Silicon Valley is almost too perfect not to be on Nintendo Switch Online. This also came out in the fall of 1998. Also designed by DMA Design and Take-Two Interactive. This is a former later game that former became later the Rockstar North F Grand Theft Auto fame, while also later establishing the Rockstar Games brand, while also sets the fourth millennium. The game begins with a titular space station reappeared in the stars, where the station contains robots, and they'll have to proceed to stir chaos to the future. This is one of the best third-party N64 video games, and the tone and gameplay suit it very well. The Space Station Silicon Valley is a player-controlled game where robot animals can evade to any remaining threats that may cause. It's like a toy-like atmosphere, making a worthy conclusion to the expansion pack. Next on the list is Castlevania. Now, this is one of my favorites, Castlevania. Castlevania would bring thrills to Nintendo Switch Online. It is one of my favorite games. This came out in the winter of 1999. Yes, Castlevania came out in the winter of 1999, and I remembered playing it when I was only just a wee little boy. When I was just a wee little boy. This game came out and was developed by a company we know, Konami. Castlevania and Castlevania 64 Conclusion is basically a 3D installment game, which is a horror film platform which action adventure. This is set in the year 1852. It also has two heroes, is Carrie Fernandez and Reinhard Schneider, as they seek to defeat Count Dracula, who's reawakened from a long slumber. Not surprisingly, this adventure is not easy. While Castlevania 64 might not be as memorable entry to the franchise, it's still a formidable effort to bring Castlevania to the 3D environment. Now, plus given the Castlevania series on Nintendo Switch Online would be really good, because now they have Bloodlines for Sega Genesis and Legends for Game Boy. This service could also even have an oddball entry like Castlevania 64, which again was not as great as Castlevania the original. Mickey Speedway USA. What is going on with Mickey Speedway USA? Mickey Speedway USA was released in the fall of 2000. This was also a Rare Nintendo publisher. Again, Mickey Speedway USA is a racing game developed by a Rare Nintendo collaboration with Disney Interactive Games. Now, Mickey Mouse discovers his pet dog Pluto has been kidnapped by nefarious weasels. Strangely now, Mickey now has to rescue his dog by going across the long country race with his friends Donald Duck and Goofy. The latest article, Best Xbox Games by Rare, were ranked. We're not talking just about Rare, we're just going to talk about more about Mickey Speedway. Now again, the title can be described as the Disney version of Mario Kart 64 from one hand, while also better comparison can also be known for the Disney's version of Diddy Kong Racing. Now again, Mickey Speedway USA is a family-friendly game and is one of Rare's best non-Donkey Kong games. While also licensing issues in mind, Mickey Speedway USA is not a Nintendo Switch Online at this time. Now we also have Wipeout 64. Wipeout 64 is like Fast and the Furious, but for Nintendo Switch. This came out in the fall of 1998. Again, by Pig Genesis and Midway Games. Wipeout 64 is a racing video game with third entries in Wipeout series by Futuristic Racing. This happens in the year 2098 AD, well, 1 year after the Wipeout 2097, which was over 46 years after the original game, where Wipeout 64 is basically the part where high stakes, high thrill matching. Now, given big racing matches as well. Given that the Ridge Racer 64 already on Nintendo Switch Online, Wipeout 64 wouldn't feel too out of place. With a quintessential fast-paced race, Wipeout 64 stands out as one of the best racing games on N64, and has deserved to find a new audience on Switch. Again, Pygmalion, the studio, also created Wipeout series, also consolidated with Sony Computer Entertainment System, and they have later closed it. But hopefully there's still a way to bring the franchise back. San Francisco Rush 2049 would rush to Nintendo Switch Online. Their release original was back in the fall of 2000. Again, San Francisco Rush 2049 is a futuristic racing game and is the third entry of the Rush series and is high-speed racing. Like other games, the San Francisco Rush 2049 was originally released in arcades by the Atari, region ports by N64 by Midway. Midway Games also does a lot of Ataris for Chuck E. Cheese's. Well, also big in the 1990s, likewise. While set in digital year, the game also plays a variety of futuristic cars. Titles like San Francisco Rush 2049 is also possibly one of the best Rush entries made by Nintendo 64. seriously belonging to Nintendo Switch Online. This game also captures the moment and the tone that Nintendo 64 has so aimed to do with their racing library, considering that Midway has a strong third party support and has done lots of support with Notori. Now, it feels like only a matter of time before it's added to the NSO library. Yes, I'm fine. Yes, I'm fine. Again, Doom 64 would also bring Doom to Nintendo Switch Online. Doom 64 is not the Nintendo 64 part, but also the seminal first person shooter of Doom. Rather than the sequel like previous Doom, Doom 2 Hell on Earth, the final Doom is an installment Doom guy accidentally returns to Hell during an otherwise uneventful mission to investigate the disappearance of corporate ships from outer space. So far, the games of Doom, also like Doom and the Vice Project Doom and Doomsday Warrior for Super Nintendo, not to get those confused, is about the time of proper Doom games. While made for appearance on the service, and his unique storylines and weapons and enemies Doom 64 is not a bad start. Diddy Kong Racing. That came out in the fall of 1997. Yeah, buddy. Yeah, buddy. Yeah, buddy. Also developed by Rare Games. Diddy Kong Racing. Yes, Diddy Kong Racing. Published by Rare under Nintendo's blessing, they say it's roughly been the same road Donkey Kong Country games, and to extent is an extension to the Mario series. While the story follows Diddy Kong and his friend Timber the Tiger and his friends that try to stop the race from the nefarious Whizpig. The game is nothing but short and vibrant and has a really colorful cast of racers and debut appearances of Banjo-Kazooie's Banjo and Conker's Bad Fur Day Conker. The race in itself is just colorful, and characters embarking on wacky journeys through a fantastic world to stop an equally over-the-top villain. It is a crime in a race, but Diddy Kong Racing isn't on Nintendo Switch Online. Super Smash Bros. Now, Super Smash Bros. Came out in the spring of 1999. Also done by HAL Laboratory and Nintendo. Super Smash Bros. Is an iconic N64 crossover game where basically it's marked the start of Nintendo's lucrative Super Smash Bros. Series, pitting against the company's finest characters against one another. Originally developed in the designer's spare time and treated as afterthoughts. Also said to be defining titles for N64, and as thanks to wild premises. There's also really little to say, while also Super Smash Bros. Beyond the novel idea it was, putting characters like Mario and Legend of Zelda into battle, while other wacky combinations of other Nintendo characters struck with brilliance. The fact is, it still hasn't appeared on Nintendo Switch Online, and it is a crime. Why is this game not on Nintendo Online? Nintendo Switch Online is not mad enough for Conker's Bad Fur Day. Now, Conker's Bad Fur Day came out in the spring of 2001, also created by Rare Games. Conker's Bad Fur Day is a platform and action adventure game developed by Rare Games. Evidently, Nintendo is too chicken to publish it, and there is a good reason. The game follows Conker as he tries to make his way home after waking up with a hangover from a wild party the night before. Now, along the way, he ends up running errands with all sorts of creatures, from perverted bees and foul mouthed cogs. Again, there's so much to say about Conker's Bad Fur Day, but it's hard to know where to start. After all, it's just a game about a red squirrel fighting gigantic slobs of poop. Hardly needs too much explanation. While also certainly is that given the presence of upper M-rated titles on Nintendo Switch Online, like Turok 2, The Seeds of Evil and Shadow Men, there's theoretically nothing stopping Nintendo from adding Conker's Bad Fur Day onto their service. And that is why it took number one on the list. That is why it took number one on the list of the best N64 games that are not on Nintendo Switch Online. But hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll have some of these games hop over and cross over onto Nintendo Switch Online, given that now we have the announcement of Nintendo Switch 2.